The training simulation chamber hummed with a low frequency that made everyone's bones itch. Lieutenant Daniel Pierce stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by representatives from 5 different species. The commander had a body made of hard, shiny armor. His skin looked like metal and stone mixed together. Next to them stood the delegates. Their skin was clear like glass, and you could see their organs moving inside their bodies. Behind the reinforced barrier, the observers made clicking sounds that their translation devices rendered as skepticism. Daniel was a human soldier. He was tall and built strong, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. His military uniform was plain gray, marked with the symbols of Earth's first deep space military program. 6 months ago, he had been assigned to this joint training facility as humanity's representative. The Galactic Council had decided that humans were ready for advanced military education. Most other species still treated Earth like a curiosity rather than a serious player in galactic affairs. Daniel had spent those 6 months proving them wrong in every simulation, every tactical exercise, every test of combat theory. The instructor, a season named, had called this emergency protocol exercise without warning. No preparation time, no equipment briefing, just 10 minutes notice that every species attending the military academy would have to demonstrate improvised combat readiness. They had never failed such a test in recorded history. They had impressive records. They rarely impressed anyone, but they always tried hard. They simply relied on their biological advantages. They had razor-sharp claws and lightning-fast reflexes that were almost impossible to match. Daniel watched as the other species' representatives began moving around the chamber. The commander named moved toward the reinforced structural supports. He was clearly planning to use his immense strength to collapse sections and create new weapons from the debris. They huddled together, their translucent forms glowing as they discussed strategy in their rapid, high-pitched language that the translation devices struggled to keep up with. They simply stretched and flexed their muscles. They moved with confidence, as if their claws and agility were enough for any situation. Stood at the elevated platform above them all. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall. His body was a strange combination of chitinous armor and muscular tissue. His voice came through the translation implants that everyone wore in their ears. "You have 30 minutes to prepare," announced, his tone showing no emotion. "The scenario is this. You are soldiers separated from your unit, cut off from supply lines, facing an advanced enemy force 3 times your size. Your objective is to survive and create enough chaos to allow your unit to regroup. You may use nothing that was not already in this chamber before the exercise began. You will be tested individually first, then in coordinated team scenarios. Failure means you will be marked as unsuitable for advanced tactical command training. Begin now." The other species' representatives moved with purpose and confidence. The commander began assessing structural weaknesses in the chamber walls. They formed a tight circle and began their mental linking process. They started doing combat practice, moving through elaborate martial art forms with their claws extended. Daniel stood still for a moment longer. His eyes moved across every part of the chamber. He saw what others missed because they came from worlds where survival had never required this level of creative desperation. They came from worlds where their bodies were already perfectly designed for survival. They had never needed to think beyond their physical advantages. But Earth had made humans different. Earth was a world of extremes. It had predators that were faster and stronger. It had whether that could kill. It had disease and difficulty at every turn. Humans had survived not because they were the strongest or fastest. They had survived because they learned to use anything available to them. Daniel walked slowly to the maintenance section of the chamber. There were access panels made of lightweight titanium. He found the grinding stone in the cleaning equipment station. It took 4 minutes to sharpen one panel into a serviceable blade with a decent cutting edge. He made 3 more blades while the other species' representatives started their own preparations. None of them seemed to notice what he was doing. Next, he moved to the hydration station where water was stored. The tubing could be braided into rope. He found the weighted sashes from the meditation equipment stacked in the corner. By combining the braided tubing with the weighted sashes, he created 3 boluses. Each one was capable of entangling an opponent's legs or arms. If thrown with proper force, they could slow down even the fastest alien warrior. The foam padding in the impact zones around the chamber walls could be useful too. Daniel cut strips from the padding and treated them with the acidic cleaner from the maintenance closet. It was not true acid, but it would burn human skin. It would stick to materials and create damage. He filled 4 plastic containers designed for storing weapons with this acidic mixture. He was careful and precise with his measurements. The decorative stones lining the chamber's edges became projectiles. He collected 16 of them, ranging in size from his fist down to stones that could fit in his palm. He crafted 3 slings for more webbing, then practiced his aim for 5 minutes using targets marked on the wall. Each throw was accurate. Each stone found its target. The reinforced training poles became weapons too. Daniel fashioned a staff from one of them, sharpened one end into a point, and wrapped the other end with padding for better grip. He created tripwires from the webbing that he arranged in patterns throughout the chamber. No alien species would typically use tripwires, but humans had used them for thousands of years. Humans understood that you could kill or disable an enemy without direct confrontation if you were clever enough. By minute 20, Daniel had created 17 separate weapon systems. He wove together the remaining materials into a harness that allowed him to carry all of them simultaneously while keeping his hands free for 2 others if needed. Every weapon had a purpose. Every tool served a specific function. The commander looked over at Daniel's growing collection and paused, made a sound like grinding metal. On this translation device, the sound registered as something between curiosity and amusement. When called for final preparations, Daniel stood ready. He carried 17 different weapons, 4 boluses, multiple bladed implements, a staff, and 16 projectiles positioned strategically around his body. Each item could be accessed quickly. Each had been created with specific purpose. The other species' representatives had finished their preparations too. The commander had created 7 weapons, mostly massive crushers and striking implements. They had created 5 weapons focused on speed and precision. They had created 6 weapons designed to complement their natural claws and reflexes. Stood and descended from his platform. He moved to Daniel and counted each weapon carefully. When he finished, he looked at the human with an expression that was difficult to read. "The human has made 47 distinct weapons," announced to the entire chamber. His voice carried through every section of the training facility. "This is 47 different tools designed for different purposes. This is 40 more weapons than the representative has created. This is 40 more than the representative has created. The commander has created 7. The human has created 47. This is interesting, very interesting indeed. We will be the representative, entered the testing arena first. His body was enormous, covered in hard exterior plating that looked like it had been shaped from steel. His muscles rippled beneath his armor as he moved. The simulation began with enemy soldiers appearing from different corners of the arena. They were holographic projections, but they moved and attacked like real combatants. Roared, his voice was so loud that everyone outside the testing chamber felt the vibration through their bones. The commander used his massive strength to tear apart the structural supports he had already identified. Metal beams fell from the ceiling, and he caught them, used them as clubs, swung them at the holographic enemies with brutal force. Each impact crushed the projection. The simulation recorded direct hits and eliminations. The test lasted 15 minutes, eliminated 42 simulated enemies. His performance was adequate, no failures but nothing exceptional either. He had used his strength well, but there was no complexity to his strategy. When he exited the arena, the instructor made a notation on his data pad. The representative went next. Her name was in, and her translucent body glowed with soft blue light as she moved. She had created weapons focused on speed and precision. She relied on her species' natural ability to move quickly and coordinate through mental linking. In the arena, she moved with grace and efficiency, eliminating 37 simulated enemies in the same time frame. Her strategy was better organized than this, but it lacked adaptability. Then came the representative, a male named Al. He had sharp claws on every hand and foot. His species looked like a combination of reptile and insect, with a body covered in protective exoskeletons. He used his natural weapons and his incredible speed to eliminate 39 simulated enemies. He was fast and deadly, but he did not improvise. When his claws got caught in structural obstacles, he simply used brute force to break through rather than finding another approach. The observer made rippling patterns across her transparent skin. The translation device rendered the patterns as mild surprise that they had performed better than expected. Then came Daniel's turn. The human walked into the testing arena with confidence. The other species' representatives watched through the observation barrier, stood at the control panel, his massive claws moving across the interface with precision. The simulation began differently for Daniel. Perhaps wanted to see how the human would adapt, or perhaps the instructor had programmed a more intense scenario specifically to challenge the preparations he had observed. The simulated enemy force appeared faster, more aggressive, and in greater numbers than those the other species had faced. The simulation sent 30 soldiers at Daniel immediately. Then 30 more appeared from hidden positions. Then another 15 came from above, descending on ropes. Daniel moved like water through the chamber. Each weapon was selected and deployed with specific intention. When enemies emerged from cover, he used the projectiles, each one thrown with accuracy that surprised even the observer. He hit moving targets. He hit targets partially hidden behind obstacles. He hit targets at different distances. Each stone found its mark. When simulated forces tried to advance on his position, Daniel used the boluses. He threw them with perfect timing. The weighted weapons entangled the enemy's legs and arms, buying precious seconds. Daniel moved past them while they struggled, always keeping the heavier enemies between himself and the approaching forces. When enemies got close to his body, Daniel the acid containers and created barriers of caustic mist. The liquid burned through clothing and equipment. It did not kill the simulated enemies, but it disabled them. They could not continue fighting while their vision was impaired and their skin was burning. The staff served as both defensive weapon and distance maintainer. Daniel used it to block incoming projectiles, to strike enemies at range, and to vault over obstacles that would have slowed other combatants. But the true revelation came when the scenario shifted. A simulated blockade appeared, preventing escape routes that Daniel had identified. Resources were depleted. The simulation decreed that he was surrounded with no option for traditional victory. The had failed at this point in his test, simply fighting until he was overwhelmed. The had fought with brute force until the sheer numbers of enemies defeated him. Daniel did not fight harder, he fought smarter. Instead of attacking the overwhelming force, he began setting his weapons in defensive patterns. He created a maze of tripwires and acid barriers in the center of the chamber. He positioned projectiles in throwing patterns that covered his potential retreat routes. He used the staff to create percussion sounds that masked his actual movements. He moved around the chamber, staying low, moving through shadows and gaps. The simulated enemies tried to follow, but they did not understand human tactics. They did not know how to move through tripwires. They did not expect enemies to avoid direct confrontation. They were designed for combat, not for dealing with an opponent who refused to engage directly. The simulation ended before Daniel reached complete escape, but the parameters were clear on this monitoring system. Daniel had eliminated 78 simulated enemies, significantly more than any other representative. He had expended fewer resources and adapted his strategy 4 separate times to changing circumstances. More importantly, he had done something the other species had not even considered. He had created weapons designed not for strength or speed, but for precision, deception, and adaptability. Made a sound that the translation devices rendered as deep interest. The stood and walked to the observation barrier to examine the testing chamber data. He watched the recording of Daniel's performance 3 times, each time examining different aspects of the human's movements and weapon usage. The commander moved closer to the 2 massive aliens stood together, examining the data. "The human did something unusual," said his voice deep and slow. "The human did not try to win by superior force. The human tried to win by superior thinking." "Yes," agreed. His translation device rendered his words carefully. "The human created tools for specific purposes. Each weapon solved a different problem. This shows understanding that most species never develop. The human comes from a world where physical superiority was never available, so the human learned to think differently." Daniel stood waiting for his evaluation. His heart was racing, but his face remained calm. He had done what humans did. He had looked at an impossible situation and found multiple solutions. He had refused to accept that something could not be done. He had improvised. The other species' representatives were silent. They had watched a human do something none of them had thought to do. They had watched someone with less physical strength solve problems that their natural advantages could not address. They had watched human ingenuity work against their biological superiority. Turned away from the data display and looked directly at Daniel. This expression was impossible to read, but his next words would change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. The debrief took place in a conference chamber that overlooked the academy grounds. Sat at the head of the long table, and the other species representatives occupied their places of honor. Daniel was standing in the center of the chamber, as he had been instructed. He was waiting for evaluation. His military uniform was still damp with sweat from the testing arena, but his posture was perfect and his eyes were clear. Around the table sat the most powerful military representatives from the Galactic Council. There was Commander, the warrior whose physical strength was legendary. There was In, the who represented her species' coordinated mental abilities. There was Al, the whose natural reflexes were almost superhuman. There were also two additional observers. One was a military strategist named. The other was a human military liaison from Earth, Captain. Stood and walked to the center of the table. He was so tall that his head was above the height of the seated representatives. The human created 47 distinct weapons from materials other species discarded or ignored, began, his translation device rendering his words clearly. The human demonstrated knowledge of chemistry, engineering, physics, and psychology in those creations. Most interesting was the human's understanding of purpose. Each weapon served a specific function. Each was designed to solve a particular problem. Daniel listened without moving. He had learned that showing emotion in front of alien military leaders was a sign of weakness in most galactic cultures. Continued speaking. The human's performance in the testing scenario was superior to all other representatives. The human eliminated the most enemies with the fewest resources. The human adapted strategy 4 times without hesitation. The human understood that survival did not require victory through superior force. Survival required victory through superior understanding. Commander leaned forward. His voice was deep and slow, each word carefully enunciated. I have analyzed human history, said. For thousands of years, your species survived on a world designed to kill you. Your planet possessed predators larger and faster than you. Your environment was hostile. Your body was fragile compared to local threats. And yet you survived. You dominated. You created civilizations. You created technology. You eventually left your world and reached for the stars. Why? Daniel met the commander's eyes. He spoke simply and without hesitation. Because we could not compete on strength or speed, he said. We had to think differently. Every tool, every weapon, every strategy came from understanding that we were the weaker predator. So we became creative. We became the most adaptable species that ever existed. It made rippling patterns across her transparent skin. The patterns moved in waves from her head down to her feet. The translation device struggled for a moment, then rendered the patterns as something close to reverence. This is why the Galactic Council made a mistake in dismissing humanity, the delegate said. Her voice came through the translation device as a soft, musical sound. You do not have the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. You are not the fastest or the strongest. But you understand what most species never learn. You understand how to want something badly enough to find 20 different ways to achieve it. The Who species had always relied on biological superiority was silent. His claws clicked against the table in rapid patterns. The translation device could not render the sound into clear language, but the meaning was clear. Al was frustrated. He was struggling with the concept that strength alone was not enough. Captain, the human liaison, allowed a slight smile to cross her face. She had been fighting for human recognition in the Galactic Council for 2 years. She had been working to prove that humanity had something valuable to offer. Now the proof was standing in the center of the chamber, and the most powerful military leaders in known space were acknowledging it. Made a sound that resonated through the chamber. He walked from the head of the table and approached Daniel directly. He was nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in hard armor that gleamed under the chamber lights. When he placed a clawed hand on Daniel's shoulder, the gesture meant something specific in culture. Daniel had studied the culture extensively. The gesture meant recognition of worthy challenge. It meant respect from a warrior to another warrior. Humanity, said formally, his words being recorded by multiple devices throughout the chamber, will no longer be listed as a species requiring supervision. The human representative will receive advanced tactical command training alongside the species representatives of the AND. This is the decision of this academy. This is the decision of the Council's Military Education Authority. The human will be treated as an equal in all future military planning exercises. They made additional rippling patterns. Her patterns were by the other translucent devices in the chamber. The patterns indicated agreement and support. Several other officials who had been standing along the walls of the chamber joined gesture. It was recognition. real recognition from beings who had previously viewed humanity as primitive and insignificant. Al stood from his seat, his claws extended fully, which could have been a sign of aggression, but instead he approached Daniel. The warrior looked at the human with an expression of complex emotions playing across his face. "I have never been defeated in a combat scenario," Al said. His voice was harsh and grating through the translation device. "I believe that my speed and my strength made me superior to all other fighters, but you did not try to defeat me in combat. You created weapons I could not anticipate. You created strategies I could not predict. This makes you dangerous. This makes you worthy." Also stood and approached. The commander placed his massive hand on Daniel's other shoulder. Now the human was standing between two of the strongest warriors in known space, both offering recognition. "The will form stronger alliances with humanity," said. "Not because you are physically powerful, but because you understand power differently than we do. You will find solutions to problems we cannot imagine facing. You will think your way through situations where we can only use force." Addressed the entire chamber. "This academy will recommend to the Galactic Council that human military representatives be assigned to all future strategic planning sessions. The human has demonstrated capabilities that complement species relying on biological superiority. Together, we will be stronger. Separately, we will always be incomplete." The sound that filled the chamber was something between agreement and acknowledgement. It was not applause, as humans understood applause, but it was recognition. Real, genuine military recognition from beings who had never before accepted humans as equals. Daniel looked down at the hands of two alien warriors resting on his shoulders. He thought about Earth. He thought about every ancestor who had survived by being cleverer than the predators that hunted them. He thought about every person who had looked at a problem and found 17 different solutions. 3 weeks after the debrief, Daniel Pierce received an official message from the Galactic Council Military Operations Center. The message came through the secure communication network that connected all major space stations and military installations throughout known space. The message was short but significant. "Lieutenant Daniel Pierce is hereby assigned as primary tactical consultant to Joint Military Operation Designation Alpha 72. This assignment carries the rank of commander, effective immediately. You will coordinate tactical planning between 5 distinct species military forces. Your assignment begins in 7 days. Report to Station Neutral Ground for briefing and mission parameters." Daniel read the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Commander. That was a major promotion. Humans had never held that rank in a galactic military operation. He had been a lieutenant, which was a junior officer rank. Now he was being assigned as a commander with authority over military planning that would affect millions of lives. Captain called him that same day. She was excited but trying to hide it in her professional voice. "Did you get the assignment?" she asked through the communication network. "Yes," Daniel said. "Commander rank, tactical consultant for Operation Alpha 72. "Do you know what that operation is?" asked. "No," the message said details would come at the briefing on Station Neutral Ground. His excitement was evident even through the digital transmission. "That operation is defending the Rattan mining outpost. It has been under attack by organized raiders for 6 months. The Galactic Council has been trying to assemble a military force to protect it, but the raiders have been more clever than expected. They have been using tactics that are unfamiliar to traditional military forces. Tanks do not work well in that environment. Direct force does not work. They need someone who can think about problems differently." Daniel understood immediately. The Galactic Council wanted him because he had proven he could create solutions that others could not imagine. He was going to be sent to a place where conventional military tactics had failed, and they expected him to find another way. The next 7 days were a blur of preparation. Daniel went through briefings and training sessions designed to prepare him for his new role. He learned about the Rattan mining outpost's layout and defense systems. He studied the raider group that had been attacking it. They were not a single organized force, but rather a coalition of several smaller groups that had formed an alliance. They used hit-and-run tactics. They attacked supply convoys. They damaged facilities, and then retreated before military forces could respond effectively. The problem was that traditional military tactics relied on identifying a central location to attack or defend. The raiders did not have a central location. They had multiple hidden bases throughout the region. They moved constantly. They used local knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Standard military forces could not catch them because they did not stay in one place long enough to be surrounded. On the seventh day, Daniel boarded a military transport shuttle heading to Station Neutral Ground. The station was a massive structure orbiting the Rattan system. It served as a neutral meeting place where different species could coordinate without political complications. Daniel arrived to find representatives from 5 different species already assembled. There was a commander named. There was a military strategist named. There were coordination specialists. There were fighter pilots. And there were human military officers from Earth. The briefing room was large and circular, with a massive display in the center showing the Rattan mining outpost and the surrounding terrain. Who was clearly the senior commander, stood at the head of the briefing. The Raider Coalition has been conducting operations in this region for 6 months, explained, his claws moving across the display to highlight different areas. The Rattan mining outpost produces materials necessary for the construction of advanced spacecraft. Loss of this outpost would be a strategic disaster for the Galactic Council. However, conventional military approaches have failed to eliminate the Raider threat. Why? Daniel asked. It was the first thing he had said since arriving at the station. Looked at the human commander. What do you mean? Why have conventional approaches failed? What specifically about the Raider tactics makes traditional military responses ineffective? The strategist answered. The Raiders do not concentrate their forces. They use small groups to strike targets. When we send forces to defend one location, they attack a different location. When we send larger forces to patrol, they simply avoid engagement. They do not want to fight our military directly. They want to cause enough damage and disruption to make the mining outpost unprofitable. Daniel studied the display. He moved his hands across it, rotating the view, zooming in on different areas. He marked locations and drew lines showing potential supply routes and attack patterns. The other commanders watched in silence. The Raiders are not avoiding you because they are weak, Daniel said after several minutes of analysis. They are avoiding you because you are strong. They understand that they cannot win a direct military engagement against the Galactic Council forces. So they are using strategy instead of strength. They are making the cost of maintaining the outpost higher than the value of the outpost. Yes, the coordinator said. This is the problem we have been unable to solve. Daniel looked at the faces of the alien commanders gathered around the display. He saw frustration in the fighter pilot's expression. He saw confidence in the commander's posture. He saw uncertainty in the strategist's eyes. We have been thinking about this wrong, Daniel said. He reached out and moved several markers on the display. We have been trying to protect the outpost. We have been trying to catch the Raiders, but the Raiders are not trying to take the outpost. They are trying to make it so expensive to maintain that it becomes worthless. So we need to change what we are defending. We need to make the Raiders the problem instead of the mining outpost. Explain, commanded. Daniel spent the next hour laying out a tactical plan that would have seemed impossible to any of the other commanders an hour earlier. He identified locations where the Raiders had to pass to move supplies. He identified the weaknesses in their coalition structure. He identified the political and economic pressures that were keeping the various Raider groups together. Then he proposed a strategy that did not try to defeat the Raiders directly. Instead, it turned their own strengths against them. We established small outpost positions in these locations, Daniel said, pointing to seemingly random spots on the map. We station fewer soldiers than normal at each position. We make them appear vulnerable. The Raiders will attack because they will believe the outposts are easy targets. But these positions will be connected by communication networks and supply lines that the Raiders do not understand. When they attack one position, we respond from 3 different directions simultaneously. We do not try to kill the Raiders. We try to separate them from their supply sources. We try to create conflict within their coalition. We use their own tactics against them. The other commanders exchanged looks of surprise and recognition. What Daniel was describing was not military strategy in the traditional sense. It was something more complex. It was creating a situation where the Raiders would defeat themselves. This is good, said finally. This is very good. We will begin preparation immediately. Commander, 2 months after the tactical plan was implemented, the Raider coalition in the Rattan system was effectively neutralized. It did not happen through violent confrontation. It happened because Daniel Pierce had understood something that military strategists from 5 different species had not been able to grasp. The Raiders were held together by economic necessity and political alliance. Once those two factors were disrupted, the coalition fell apart on its own. The smaller raider groups, now separated from their allies and cut off from supply sources, either surrendered or dispersed into the wider galaxy. The major coordinating leaders were captured without significant loss of life. The Rattan mining outpost remained operational and secure. What had seemed like an impossible situation 3 months earlier was now a successful military operation being studied in tactical academies throughout known space. Daniel was reassigned to Station Neutral Ground as the official liaison for human military operations. This was a position that would have seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. He was now the human representative on the Galactic Council's Military Planning Committee. He had command authority equal to that of any, or commander. He had proven that humanity could contribute to galactic military operations in ways that went beyond simple force and violence. The night after his official assignment to the committee, Daniel stood in the observation dome on Station Neutral Ground. The dome was located on the upper section of the station and offered a clear view of the stars. The observation area was usually empty, except for the occasional officer needing a moment away from the constant activity of a military command center. A figure joined him at the viewing window. It was the commander who had first acknowledged Daniel's capabilities in the training chamber. The alien stood in silence for a moment before speaking. He was so tall that his head was above the top of the transparent dome. "I have reviewed the detailed analysis of your tactical plan for the Rattan operation," said. His voice was deep and carried the weight of a being who had spent decades in military service. "You did something that I would not have considered. You turned the enemy's strength into weakness. You used their own patterns of movement against them. You understood that they had limitations not because they lacked military power, but because they lacked the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances." "That is what humans have always done," Daniel said. He kept his eyes on the stars. "We are not the strongest or the fastest. We are the species that can change tactics immediately if the situation requires it. We can look at a problem from 17 different angles and find solutions that others never consider." "Yes," agreed. "I have reviewed human history more thoroughly in the past 2 months than I did in the previous 10 years. Your species fought wars against each other with weapons created from materials barely more advanced than dirt. You used fire as a weapon before you fully understood chemistry. You built machines to fly on a world where your bodies could not naturally accomplish flight. You created tools from bone and stone and wood. You survived predators that were larger and faster by thinking your way to victory." Daniel turned to look at the commander. "Every human child learns to improvise. We learn that there is almost always another way if you are willing to look hard enough. We learn that obstacles are just problems waiting for solutions. We learn that accepting that something cannot be done is the only true failure. This is why they are recommending to the Galactic Council that human military representation be increased," said. "We cannot rely on force and speed forever. There will always be enemies that cannot be defeated through superior strength. But humans have proven that you can defeat any enemy if you understand them well enough to find their weaknesses." A message alert sounded on Daniel's communication device. He checked it and found notification that the Galactic Council had officially accepted the recommendation. 3 additional human military officers would be assigned to key positions in galactic military operations. 4 military exchange programs would be established to train human officers alongside other species. Earth would receive resources to develop a more advanced space military program. "This is the beginning," said. He placed his massive hand on Daniel's shoulder in the same gesture of respect he had made in the debrief chamber. "Your species will become essential to galactic defense, not because you are powerful, but because you think differently. You will find enemies we cannot imagine fighting. You will solve problems we cannot conceive of facing, and you will do it with whatever materials lie at hand." The commander left the observation dome, leaving Daniel alone with the stars. The human stood at the transparent wall and looked out at the vast emptiness of space. He thought about Earth, the world that had made humans who they were. He thought about his parents, who had always encouraged him to find solutions rather than accept limitations. He thought about every teacher who had asked him to think about problems differently. He thought about every ancestor who had survived by being cleverer than the predators that hunted them. Over the next year, the changes to human status in the galactic military structure accelerated. Human tactical consultants were assigned to 17 major military operations. In 14 of them, human strategies resulted in successful outcomes that other species' military planners said were impossible. Word spread throughout the galaxy. Humans could not match the physical strength of the. Humans could not match the mental coordination of the. Humans could not match the speed and reflexes of the. But humans could match the in tactical intelligence, and they could exceed every species in adaptability and creative problem-solving. By the end of the second year, Earth had been granted full military partnership status in the Galactic Council. Human military officers commanded fleets that included ships from 5 different species. Human strategies were being taught in military academies throughout known space. The simple human lieutenant who had walked into an emergency training exercise and created 47 weapons had fundamentally changed how the galaxy approached military problems. Daniel stood in his new command center on station neutral ground. The display screens around him showed active military operations throughout the galaxy where human tactical consultants were deployed. Each one was a story of humans finding solutions that others considered impossible. Each one was another step toward full integration of humanity into galactic civilization. Captain visited him at the station 6 months later. She brought data on new human military recruits requesting assignment to galactic operations. The numbers were growing exponentially. Young humans from Earth wanted to serve in the broader galaxy, wanted to prove themselves alongside alien species, wanted to contribute their unique problem-solving abilities to galactic defense. "Do you realize what you started?" asked him. Daniel looked at the numbers on the data pad. Thousands of applications from young humans eager to prove that their species belonged among the stars. "I just solved a problem," he said. "The same way humans have always solved problems. I looked at what was available and found 17 different ways to accomplish the goal. Except instead of 47 weapons created in 30 minutes, I created 47 opportunities for humanity to prove what we could do." The stars outside the command center window twinkled with infinite possibility. The future unfolded with potential that no species had predicted. Humans had come to the stars not with the strongest weapons or the fastest ships, but with something far more valuable. They had come with the ability to see problems that others could not solve, and the determination to find solutions that others had never imagined. That was the true strength of humanity. Not their strength or speed, but their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. "Pierce, you have full authority to adjust the tactical plan as needed during implementation. The Galactic Council has faith in your approach." Daniel nodded. He had been given his first major command as a human military officer in the galaxy. He had been given the authority to plan operations that would affect millions of lives. And he had been given this authority because he understood something that most species never learned. Strength alone was not enough. You had to think your way to victory. About humans learning to use fire, to build shelters, to create tools from nothing. The commander moved toward the testing arena. Daniel watched him go, then looked down at his hands. They were already moving, already thinking about what each weapon could do, already preparing for the challenge ahead. This was what he did. This was what humans had always done. They looked at impossible situations and found 47 ways to win.